What is up, Pack-A-Day members? Welcome into our members-only chat for today, noon Central Time, Tuesday, March 25th. As I mentioned on the post, I'm going to be out of office pretty much the rest of the week, so I wanted to get our members chat in today before I leave for vacation tomorrow. No Pack-A-Day Live, no happy hour for the remainder of this week, but we'll be back next week for sure. But yeah, thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being members. Excited for today's chat. We've got some good chats in already. I will get to as many as I possibly can over the next hour or so. And when we exhaust all the questions, we'll get out of here. But we will start right away with the impossible question. That is, Chicken, could you please explain the comp pick formula to me because it makes zero sense? The short answer is no. I cannot explain it in its entirety. Also, the last I checked, and I haven't looked at it recently, but I do not believe the entire comp pick formula has ever been released. Now, Nick over at Over the Cap does a phenomenal job of both explaining and basically figuring out the formula and keeping track of it all throughout the season and which teams are set up to get which comp picks and things like that, who qualifies, all of it. In its simplest terms, when you lose a unrestricted free agent to another team, it is considered part of a compensatory pick formula that can come in the, result of a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, or seventh round pick. Can't be a first or second rounder. And if you lose a big time free agent, and there's a certain threshold, I think this year's is over like 20 million per year, it's going to be a third round comp pick. And then there's the next tier is fourth round, and then fifth, and then sixth, and then seventh. And it kind of goes like that. So, for example, Green Bay losing Eric Stokes, Josh Myers, Corey Ballantyne, etc., could theoretically count against the comp pick formula. Now, there's also a cutoff to that. If you don't get enough in a per year salary, then it would not potentially count towards the comp pick formula. Also, comp pick formula picks offset each other. So, for instance, if Green Bay loses, let's just say Eric Stokes got a massive deal in free agency, right? Let's say he got a 4-year, $80 million deal in free agency. It's obviously ridiculous, but say Eric Stokes got a 4-year, $80 million deal to play with the Raiders. The Packers signing Aaron Banks to a 4-year, $77 million deal counterbalances that. So Green Bay does not get a comp pick for Eric Stokes because they signed Aaron Banks on their own. If you were to lose, let's say, 3 good players in free agency, and you didn't sign anyone on your own, you're going to get 3 compensatory picks for those players in all likelihood. The value of those comp picks is going to vary depending on the length and structure of the contract. Also, there are playing time things that go into it the following season. If Eric Stokes right now is counting for your compensatory pick formula and he gets released at some point in the season, that can also affect it, or before the season, that can also affect it. So there's a lot of different things that go into that equation. But the basic gist of it is when you lose unrestricted free agents, if they sign to a deal that's high enough to be considered in the compensatory pick formula, you will be included in that formula. If you counterbalance it, it will counter each other out. If you don't, then you're going to get some comp picks in return. There's also a set limit as to how many comp picks there's going to be in each draft. There's also, I think, a minimum, because I think this year they had to award a team a compensatory pick despite there not being necessarily a reason for it, because they didn't have the necessarily amount of compensatory picks that were needed. So there's tons of crazy stuff that goes into it. I mean, a ton of crazy stuff that goes into it. But if you go over at overthecap.com and look up compensatory picks and things like that, I think it's Nick Colte is, I believe, the name. He does a phenomenal job explaining everything and keeping track of it throughout the course of the year. I love Tua, but I need him to get a season-ending hangnail so they trade for Jameis Winston and he can throw to Hill and Waddle 40 touchdowns and 40 interceptions. Not many quarterbacks that are different than one another than Jameis Winston and Tua Tagovailoa. Like, 2 very different types of quarterbacks, right? Obviously, Jameis is now a New York Giant, so like you said, they'd have to trade for him. If Tua did go down, I'm not sure what the appetite would be for Miami to trade, but Tua in that offense, Jameis in that offense would be some must-watch television, what you would get on any given day. He could throw for like 8 touchdowns in a game. It wouldn't surprise me. He could throw for 8 picks in a game, and it wouldn't surprise me. It would definitely be some must-watch TV. What's good, Andy? I think it would be really neat if Luke Musgrave turned into a legit receiving threat for the Pack. What are some things to look for this offseason that would be positive indicators of that happening? And what does a successful season for Musgrave look like, understanding he's on a team with Kraft? Yeah, so I think the number one thing, if you're looking for an indicator as to or a good sign for Luke Musgrave, is just him staying healthy. I think him being healthy throughout the course of training camp and being out there and getting the reps and, continuing to learn the offense and just mastering his craft, I think is going to be super huge for him. So hopefully he can go into the season actually healthy and actually having a full training camp at his disposal. That'd be the number one thing I would look for. As far as what else to look at in camp, I mean, any positive signs, right? But there's not much that you can glean. I mean, maybe he put on a little bit of, strength and muscle this offseason. That would be great. We've seen guys that have gone out and tore it up in training camp, and then the regular season comes and you never hear from them. We've seen guys that have gone out and had terrible training camps, and the regular season comes and they look amazing. Now, Robert Tonyan was the star of training camp, that one year, and then the first 5 games of the season, he didn't do anything, and then he got hurt. DJ Williams was another one of those at tight end. That was more mini camp and OTAs, and we never really heard from him. And then like Josh Jacobs had a very slow start of mini camp OTAs and even training camp. And then like in his very veteran way, ramped it up perfectly so that once the season started, he was good to go. And then he was phenomenal throughout the course of the season. So there's not always a ton that you can glean from that. But I think just in general, hearing more positives than negatives for Musgrave. As far as what a good season looks like, what you're looking for is more 2 tight end sets, with Musgrave and Kraft both being out there. Green Bay trusting him to be out there more, probably 25 to 28 snaps per game. On top of that, just utilizing his raw natural ability, the ability to stretch the seam, maybe catching some balls down the field, a little bit better run after the catch, not as much stumbling, a little bit better blocking would be a great sign. Probably in the 40 catch, 450 yards, 5 to 6 touchdown range as a number 2 tight end would be a really, really nice season for Luke Musgrave. I don't know how likely that is or how possible that is, but I think he is a very talented player that Green Bay needs to find a way to unlock. And hopefully this is a year where we see the Lukas Van Ness and Luke Musgrave have much better seasons and kind of break out in a significant way in 2025. Jordan Love's ceiling comp, I don't know that I have a player. I mean, the high-end ceiling is maybe someone akin to Brett, but I don't even want to put that expectation out there. So I just think that if he hits his ceiling, he's a top 5 quarterback. Whoever you want to compare him to is sort of your own cup of tea. But I think if he legitimately hits his ceiling, if he literally becomes the best player that he's capable of becoming, I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the league. And I think we saw glimpses of that at the end of 2023, where he was just absolutely on fire. A top 5 quarterback in the league doesn't do that over a 6-7 week period of time. They do it consistently through a 17 game season and into the playoffs. So he's going to have to prove the consistency. He's going to have to get better with his mechanics, and he's going to have to show it in the playoffs if he wants to be that guy. But do I think he can? Yes. Whether or not he will, that remains to be seen. I think he probably ends up more as like a top 10, maybe top 12 guy. I think he's going to be better than he showed a season ago. I really do. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. How good? That's what I'm really interested in watching 2025 for a variety of different reasons. But I just want him to stay healthy so we get more clarity on who Jordan Love is, how good he can be, and can he be the guy again that leads this team to Super Bowls, or is he just a piece of the equation and they're going to need really good pieces around him if Green Bay wants to win a Super Bowl? GoldX, thank you for all you do, Andy. You are an amazing journalist, and I love listening to the show every day. Thank you for taking time out of your day to do this. GoldX, you are more than welcome. Thank you very much for the kind words. Thank you for giving me the platform and the opportunity to do this. I've said and I've joked before, there were 5 people listening at any given time, I'd probably still be doing it. I enjoy the heck out of it. It's fun. It's enjoyable. There's a lot of sleepless or very little sleep nights, if I'm being honest. I'm still trying to get into a better routine with the radio show and the Bleacher Report show and just prepping for those, and obviously covering the draft and free agency and just all of it. It takes a lot of time, effort, and energy, but it's a labor of love. I wouldn't rather be doing anything else in the world. And I appreciate that you are enjoying it. And again, I appreciate the platform to be able to do so. Trans Rights, good to see you, my friend. Hope you're doing well. What receivers have you looked into, and who are you interested in Green Bay taking in the draft? I've not. I've now started my deep study into the draft. I shouldn't say that entirely. I've watched a couple of wide receivers just a little bit, but as I've talked about, I'm going on vacation this week. my entire family will be in bed by pretty much probably 9 p.m. every night. So I'm going to probably have, 4 hours where I actually don't have any work to do. I've already got almost all the episodes recorded and uploaded and everything like that. So it's just going to be me spending a lot of time every night covering the draft. I've started to dig into a lot of the early round picks just to kind of take a look at them. And what I usually do is I start with Daniel Jeremiah's top 50, start with number 1, work my way all the way through number 50. Then I'll go to somebody else's top 50 and be like, all right, who did they have that wasn't in Jeremiah's? And then look at those and then maybe one others. And then I'll start looking at like Brugler's like top 100 list or things like that and continuing on until I've kind of watched, I should get through about 150, 100 to 150 players, where what I really want to make sure that I know is the top 3 rounds. So when we're going live on days 1 and 2, I know all of the prospects, can talk about them super educatedly, that I have notes on all of them, that I've watched the all 22 on all of them. And that's going to be, my goal over the next month. So about 4 to 5 per day. I should get to more throughout the course of this week while I'm on vacation, but I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's one of my favorite times of year. It's like cramming for a test at the end. Every single year to a T, I say, I'm going to just watch, one prospect a day. Sounds really easy, right? You've got 365 days. Just once the draft is over, just watch one prospect a day, watch their all 22, and you'll get to 365 prospects that you've watched by the end of the year, by the time the next draft rolls around. Sounds really easy. As I've talked about a million different times before, one, when you get to immediately after the draft, yes, you can go watch their 2024 tape, but you want the more recent tape more often than not, which you have to wait for the college season to be played. Once the college season starts, you're in the midst of NFL season. And if I'm going and watching prospects, then I'm not really covering the Packers the way that I want to be covering the Packers, because I never feel like I can get enough Packers stuff in when the season is going on. And that becomes a problem. As soon as the season's done, then you sort of do your recap of the season. As soon as your recap is done, then you immediately jump into there could be coaching changes. First of all, if there's coaching changes, then that. If not, then you immediately jump into what free agents could Green Bay sign? What free agents does Green Bay need to re-sign on their own team? And you start diving into the tape on those. Then Green Bay actually signs free agents, and you dig into the tape on Nate Hobbs and Aaron Banks and McCole Hardman. And all of a sudden you get to March 25th and you're like, there is a draft in a month. But it happens every single year. I'm used to it. I know exactly how to prepare for it. And I'm very, this is one of my favorite times of the year, is the next month, just finally getting to dive in and study these guys. And I get to as many guys as I can, but I'll get to your receivers very, very soon. And obviously it's a high priority with where Green Bay's picking in this draft. So I'll have probably the top 100, 150 guys in this draft studied very well. And then I'll go and watch all the top 30 visits, and some of the guys that Jacob Westendorf and Ross Uglum and Jacob Morley really identify as some very top Packers types as well. I'll make sure to study those guys as well going into the draft. Happy Tuesday, Andy. Keep up the great work. Mike, I appreciate that a ton. Really have high hopes for Oladapo this season as a core special teamer, and maybe even more of a rotational role in defense. I think they have an embarrassment of riches at safety right now. I love Xavier McKinney. I think that goes without saying. Loved what Evan Williams did in his rookie season. I know Javon Bullard's probably going to be in the slot. I still think he is probably a long-term safety in the league. There may not be that role for him. He's going to probably have to play in the slot, because Evan Williams and Xavier McKinney are probably going to occupy those 2 spots in Green Bay for a while. And then you've got Kitano Oladapo. I actually really liked what he did on the field in a couple of those later games at the end of last year. And then Zane Anderson looked good in his playing time as well. I just think they've got a phenomenal safety core, and what a makeover job in one season. The only carryover from 2023 to 2024 was Zane Anderson, of all people. Zane Anderson, the only carryover. And they signed Xavier McKinney. They draft Williams, Bullard, and Oladapo, and it was gorgeous. And they've remade it in a really impressive way. And to now that it's one of the real strengths in this Packers roster. But I as well really liked what I saw out of Oladapo last year. Gut feel at 23 today, as far as position goes, I would think it has to be defensive lineman or edge, but the best player available probably is the route to go. Would love if Stewart slides to Green Bay. Go Pack, go. I do think defensive line will be the pick. Could it be an offensive lineman? Sure. Could it be a wide receiver? Sure. Could it be a corner? Sure. I think you look at wide receiver and corner in the first round, and it's tougher to kind of make sense of who Green Bay would be going after at that particular spot, but not impossible, but I think less likely. They just signed Aaron Banks. They drafted a first rounder in Jordan Morgan this past year. I don't think offensive lineman is likely in first round, but I definitely think it is not out of the question at all. Not going to be a quarterback, running back, or a tight end. At least it'd be pretty stunning. Don't think it's going to be an off-ball linebacker. Don't think it's going to be a safety for all the safeties that we just talked about. So I think the very, very high likelihood is that this is an edge rusher or an interior defensive lineman. Who you want at that point. Shamar Stewart makes a lot. If he's there, I will be. When I say I usually don't use like stunned or shocked very often. I will be stunned/shocked if Shamar Stewart is not the pick, if he is there at pick 23. Stunned/shocked. I won't go that far yet just because I want to study everyone a little bit more, but man, he's just a Packers type through and through, and he's a really good player. He's a position of need. This just has Green Bay written all over it if he's there. And then, interior defensive line is obviously the other one. Haven't watched these guys yet, but you've got a handful of guys that could be in play right around that spot at pick 23. So that's another position. I would be willing to bet you, if I were having to place a bet on it today, that defensive line, whether it be interior or defensive end, would be the pick at pick 23. Do you believe we should draft a wide receiver every year? Now, I don't really necessarily believe in any sort of absolute like that. I think there's certain things that you would like to do, whether it's taking a wide receiver, taking a quarterback, some things like that. But I think in an ideal world, you'd probably like to take somebody at almost every position every year, outside of like punter, kicker, things like that. But, just gaining more depth and competition is always a good thing. There's only a finite amount of resources, right? And you can only do so much. I think in a zoomed out level, you can be like, oh, Green Bay should do this and they should do this. And this is what we'd like to do. And there's a lot of planning that goes into it, and that's great. But when you get on the clock, life is different. And all of those things that you're like, well, we'd really like to do this in the draft. Well, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. I talked to Justice today, and we've talked about this in the past as for that Sean Clifford pick is kind of a great example of like, you can't go into the draft thinking that you need to do something because you're going to end up with a Sean Clifford. They felt like they needed to get a backup quarterback. They didn't have any money to spend. They felt like they needed a backup quarterback in that draft. There was a run on quarterbacks right before Green Bay drafted, and they end up, I think, panic selecting Sean Clifford because they needed a quarterback. And in that situation, you end up with a player who is probably a 7th round /UDFA picked in the 5th round that gets, cut and is now on his 3rd jersey number and is probably not going to be on the team any longer. And so you don't necessarily want to go into being like, well, we want to draft a quarterback in this. We want to draft a wide receiver. We want to draft this. You have to let the board dictate what you're going to do. And that means whether it's trading up, whether it's trading down, whether it's staying put, what positions you're taking. More often than not, the best thing that you can do is A, trust the board, and B, take literally the best player that's out there. Your board should be stacked based on positional value and talent and all the things that go into the overall evaluation. But listen, if Green Bay believes, like Jihad Campbell, for example, right? If they believe that he is a stud, right, top 10 pick, blue chip player, he's there at 23, and you look at your board and you're like, well, there's a edge rusher that we kind of like. There's a defensive tackle that we like, and maybe Derek Harmon. We like those guys. They're good grades, but we have a higher grade on Jihad Campbell. You can look at it and say, well, you've got Quay, you've got Edgerrin Cooper, you just re-signed McDuffie, you spent a 3rd round pick on Tyron Hopper. Maybe Jihad Campbell doesn't make a ton of sense, right? More often than not, grab the best player and let the rest play out later. Because you're all of a sudden a Edgerrin Cooper, Quay Walker injury away from needing a linebacker. Maybe Jihad can play a little bit on the edge and give you a different look. Maybe you can play some 3-3-5. Maybe you can do some unique things out on defense. And maybe he just completely outplays the other two. And imagine that. Imagine Jihad ends up being the best, one of the best inside linebackers in football. And, it may not be a position of need right now, but what if Jihad Campbell is the next Brian Urlacher or Luke Kuechly, right? Just all pro, maybe Hall of Fame linebacker, right? And imagine you pass on that because you have a need at defensive tackle and you get, I don't know, what's like the next Devontae Wyatt. A good defensive tackle can help your team win, but like a mostly forgettable 1st round pick, right? And it's like, oh, good. They got the bigger position of need. They got the position that's more important for NFL play. Great. Did you get the best player? Because right now, if you had asked me if I could have another Devontae Wyatt or if I could have a Brian Urlacher /Luke Kuechly, I'll take the Brian Urlacher /Luke Kuechly. I don't care that it's not necessarily a need right now. Give me the better player. So you might go into the draft feeling like, hey, we really need to do this, this, and this. when you're on the clock, you have to be able to be malleable and, be improvisational and do what is best for the team, both now and in the long term, with what's on the clock when you're there. If you don't like it, try to get out. If you love something that's 5 picks ahead of you and you want to go get it. But you've got to let the board dictate. And hopefully your time, effort, and energy that you put into that is worthwhile. But I think picking something for the sake of picking something is usually bad philosophy more often than not, even if the idea is good, right? Taking a wide receiver in theory makes a lot of sense. In a vacuum, I love the idea. Makes all the sense in the world. In practice, I think it's probably not as good of an idea as maybe it sounds like in a vacuum, because it doesn't like work that way. And imagine again, even if you're in the 6th round, right? Imagine you look at the board and you've got a 3rd round grade on a running back that's out there, and your best wide receiver that's on the board is a 7th round grade. Yeah, we want to take a wide receiver every year, so we're going to go take the 7th round grade wide receiver. And running back's not even in need, so we're not even going to look. Take the 3rd round running back every single time. Take the guy that you think is going to be a really good player. Figure out the rest later. You can trade players. You can reevaluate your roster later. You can do a variety of different things, but get the best resource that you can possibly get, and then course correct as needed in the future is, I think, the better philosophy. Good question though, Bill. If you were a betting man, who's your top 3 players currently on the roster most likely to take a big step this season? That's a great question. Let's see. Top 3 players to take a big step. Got to think about this for a moment, because you could view this in a variety of different ways. This is a bit of a cheat, but I'm going to say Marshawn Lloyd is one of them for sure. And obviously it's like really cheating because he was hurt all of last year, but I think you're going to see a impact from Marshawn Lloyd, and just with the injuries and stuff, we didn't get to see that. So I think you're going to see an impact from Marshawn Lloyd. Man, I shouldn't say this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm not giving up on Dontavian Wicks. I think he's too damn talented. So I'm going Dontavian Wicks is another one. And then I'm going to go Jordan Morgan as my 3rd. I think he becomes a really solid starting offensive lineman. Maybe not great, maybe not world beating, but I think he becomes a legitimate, like, oh, he's just a good starting offensive lineman. So I think Jordan Morgan, Marshawn Lloyd, and Dontavian Wicks are the 3 I'm going to go with. If you had to play big brain 4D chess with one roster building personnel strategy, what would it be? Oh man, Will. That's a great question. Big brain 4D chess on how to build a roster. Here's my overarching feel. And this isn't necessarily a 4D big brain chess sort of thing. Do everything that you can all the time to get elite players. Sounds silly, sounds obvious, sounds stupid. I think so many times people go in free agency and they're like, even the Packers, all right? Say this. And I don't think there was a perfect 1A example of somebody they could have gone sign. Like, I don't think Milton Williams was this. I don't think Josh Sweat was this. I don't think there was anyone that was really available, right? If like there was a premium player available, and let's just say, who would have been a good example? Trey Smith doesn't quite get you there, but let's just say there was a premium player available in free agency. I would probably rather take the $77 million for Aaron Banks and the $48 million for Nate Hobbs, and heck, whatever you gave McCole Hardman and whatever you gave Isaiah McDuffie, and combine all of those and go get one mega player, right? Take all that money and go out and spend it on a really elite player rather than this collection of good players. I think in the way I think you have to think about this is to take all the salaries aside, right? Let's say there was an elite player. Let's just say T. Higgins was available, and let's say he was closer to like Jamar Chase than maybe T. Higgins, right? If there was that player available, and Green Bay called today after free agency settled, right? Again, take the salaries out of it. And Green Bay's like, hey, Cincinnati, we would like to trade you Aaron Banks plus Nate Hobbs plus Isaiah McDuffie plus McCole Hardman for your unbelievable wide receiver that you just signed. they're going to laugh at you. They're going to absolutely laugh at you. They're going to be like, what, you're going to give us a number, like a, solid guard, a okay, to good corner, and a wide receiver that may or may not make the team, and a backup linebacker for our superstar wide receiver. Cool. Go bleep yourself. It like, as soon as it's kind of like driving a car off the lot, right? As soon as you sign those and they're like you then try to get value for them, it's like, oh, now if we try to like actually get value for these in return, we are actually not going to get much value for it. So you sign them to those big deals, but now what can you go and actually get with it? It ends up probably not being a ton. So, and kind of the same goes for, I think you have to, you use your draft picks very wisely and try to go big game hunting in the draft as well. But I think your overarching philosophy, and I think they did a great job last year with Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney, go and get stars. Go and sign those big time players. If they're available, go get them. And I think Green Bay could do a little bit more of that to try to go a little bit more big game hunting and find those true. Now, again, this year, I don't think there was really those players available. I don't think there's anyone that I would have done that for. But that's my biggest thing. And again, there's some common sense involved in it. It may sound really lame and cliche. I just think that I would rather spend huge on a premium player than big on 2 to 3 really good players. Like give me as many premium players, because especially with the way Goody operates, I think he can find good players almost anywhere. We've seen it with Rasul Douglas off a practice squad, Alan Lazard off a practice squad, Bo Melton off a practice squad, Chris Brooks just chilling on the street. He can find good players almost anywhere. So I don't have a worry. And I don't know that you can find an Aaron Banks. I don't know that you can find necessarily a Nate Hobbs just out of anywhere, but he usually is good at finding those type of players. Just Keyshawn Nixon, 1-year vet minimum deal, no signing bonus at all when they signed him. Devondre Campbell, 1-year, $3 million deal when he went out and was a first team All-Pro. He's good at that stuff. I don't necessarily need huge money spent on good players. If I'm going to go spend that money, I want it on premium players. I think maybe Green Bay could do a little bit better job of that. Most Hated Minnesotan, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I'm very much looking forward to the time off. Which players have the biggest gap between fan perception, positive or negative, in your assessment of how they've played? That's a really fun question. I really like Elton Jenkins. I think there's still a little bit of a over confidence in Elton for what maybe the fans think he is over what he is. And he's a good player. There's no question about it. He is a good to probably really good offensive lineman. I think more often than not, people think he's great or like almost high-end Pro Bowl or all pro worthy. And he just hasn't been that. He's been a really solid, steady piece for Green Bay for a long time. I want him on the team. He's a really quality starter, all those things. I think people probably overvalue him just a little bit. Trying to just kind of go through the roster in my head. Definitely know the people who think Jordan Love is a bust are undervaluing Jordan. I'm not saying he's going to be great. I don't know. I think the season will tell a lot, but the idea that Jordan Love is just bad or he's whatever is ridiculous. I'm trying to think. Wide receiver, tight end. I think probably the idea of Luke Musgrave has been far better than what Luke Musgrave has been on the field. I'm not sure people have really quite caught up to that as of yet. I think Rasheed Walker's better than people give him credit for, although I didn't think he had quite as good of a year this past year as I was expecting, and I thought he was better at the end of 2023, but I still think he's a good player. I don't think people quite recognize how much Sean Rhyan really came on through the course of last year. Let's see. I think actually Zach Tom might be slightly getting to the category for players to watch. He's really, really good. It's another one where I think people kind of get like this almost like all pro connotation in their head. And he is really, really, really damn good. I just don't think quite to that level. Rashawn Gary is better than people give him credit for. No question about it. Is he as good as the contract or the top 12 pick or whatever? No, probably not. And I think the ACL has really, kind of derailed him a bit, but he's still a very good player for this team. Trying to think of anyone else. Those are probably the ones off the top of my head that maybe are a little bit overvalued or undervalued. All right. I'd love to see a team find a way to have success playing 6 to 7 offensive linemen or a D-line made entirely of giant nose tackles. Sky's the limit for coaches' creativity. Yeah, usually there's a reason you don't see that stuff. I do think there can be some more like fun with formations where you just throw different things out there just to see how teams respond to it. I don't think teams do enough. I think it's so hard because you want to get to like certain big plays in your game plan, right? And you're trying to find those explosive plays, and you already have like 60 snaps per game, and it's so easy to get derailed off your game plan as is. So like baking in a 6 to 7 offensive line, formation, like, yeah, I think there's things that you can do to kind of keep teams off guard, and I think it's fun, but that may not be the thing that you are. I don't think that's the thing that necessarily you're putting a bunch of extra time, effort, and energy into, right? But I love all the outside the box thinking. I think Ben Johnson's been very, very good at that. And I think there's always ways to switch things up and make things creative for teams. Why is linebacker play so different between NFL and college? Should they stand the hash marks between the two leagues? And which one do you prefer? I mean, I prefer the NFL for pretty much everything. I think just in general, the college game has gotten so much different. I don't think it's just a linebacker thing. Talked about it with Justice, with how Shamar Stewart was being played and how some of these edge rushers are being, kind of moved inside, because just the edge rushers don't even have time to get to the quarterbacks anymore, which is why you're seeing some of that sack production be down. You're seeing so much quick game. You're seeing some of these best athletes need to be at linebacker and defensive back, because again, your opportunity to beat the offensive lineman is just very, very minimal because they're getting the ball out of their hands so quick. It's just tough. Like, I think the college game is really evolving at a very high pace, at just a different version of what anything we see from a pro style in the NFL. And obviously we see some of that college stuff leak over to the NFL because it's what a lot of the players are familiar with. And you don't have a lot of time in the NFL to teach guys a bunch of new stuff. And sometimes when you do, it doesn't go very well. But it's just, the linebacker is one of those where it's not always like, some linebacker play in some teams is very similar, but what you see a lot of times is these off-ball linebackers that are almost lined up as like a slot corner, and they're a weak side linebacker and they're running and chasing everything. And you're not having to take on any blocks. You're not having to, like, you're just basically an athlete. And it's just so much different. You're not having to diagnose as much stuff in real time, whereas you get in the middle of an NFL defense and play off-ball linebacker, and the other team is literally throwing as much eye candy specifically at you to try to get you false step one way, because they know if they can get you to false step one way for 1 second, it can result in a massive play, because they're going to get you just with that one false step. It is a totally different ball game. Now you're taking on 300-pound, really, really good offensive guards in the NFL. It's so much different from college to pros. And I like the pro game more. I hope that we continue to see pro style offenses in the NFL. I think they're a little bit more enjoyable to watch. I think college gets a little gimmicky, and all the wide receiver screens and the RPOs and the I don't know. It's fine. It's not terrible, but it's not as much my cup of tea. That's for sure. I like the progression based offense of, 3, 5, 7-step drop, first read, second read, third read, and, going through a running game with a play action based off of it. I like all the creativity. I think all the plays that college is running have a place in the NFL, but I don't need it quite that gimmicky. Is there anything to read into Goot being at McMillan's Pro Day? Yeah. A couple things. I think number one is, first of all, he's such a unique player. He's not the usual cookie cutter wide receiver, right? He's a little bit different than anything that, he's just unique. I'll put it that way. I think sometimes those are harder players to evaluate. You throw on the tape and you're like, all right, I love some of the stuff that he's doing, some of the crazy one-handed catches. The size certainly plays, and like he's really fun to watch. But projecting those type of players when they are unique or a little bit different than the normal cookie cutter type player that you've seen over and over and over have success, it usually puts a little bit more onus on the GM to really make sure that, hey, this is the guy that we want to go with. So maybe having that opportunity to see him up close, you get a better feel for. Sometimes it's like, first of all, I'll say in general, the difference between sometimes a player on tape and seeing a player in person is remarkable. Quay Walker, you see him on tape and you're like, all right, I kind of get the idea. The very first day you see Quay Walker at rookie minicamp, you're like, okay, I get this instantly. I mean, the dude just looks like a prototypical NFL linebacker, height, weight, speed, intimidating. Like, you see him in person, you're like, yep. If you're lining up people on the fence at recess, Quay Walker's going very, very high in that draft. Lukas Van Ness, same sort of thing. You can sort of see it. That's not the be all end all. You can't just draft that way. But not just the physical aspect of it, but some of the little intricate movements that on tape, from a 20,000-foot view up from the all 22 or whatever, you can see certain things in person. You can see those little twitchy things that happen or the little dynamic movements that you can't always see from the all 22. So I think when there's a more unique player that you want to get a better feel for, sometimes seeing them up close is a real great way to kind of finalize your evaluation of, hey, I really think I like this player, but he's unique. I want to double check and make sure. Let me go see him live. And that's going to either confirm or deny some of maybe the suspicions that you had going in, whether that's good or bad. And I think the other thing is McMillan's one of those players, and Daniel Jeremiah had it in his mock, right? Green Bay picks at 23. Daniel Jeremiah had him at pick 22 in his mock draft, going one pick before Green Bay, and said in his mock, and I totally agree with him, this is a player that it would not shock me if he went top 8, and it would not shock me if he went into the mid-20s in the draft. So what you don't want to do either is get sort of caught with your pants down thinking, and not that Green Bay ever would, but thinking, oh, he's going to go in the top 10. And then all of a sudden he's there around pick 20, 22, 23. And you've been like, oh, we should have evaluated him a little bit more, taken this a little bit more seriously. Then Green Bay's doing their due diligence. And maybe if they do love him, maybe they probably can't get up in the top 8, right? It's probably just a non-starter. But all of a sudden, if he's at pick 15, pick 16, and they love him, now you're talking like, all right, can we get up to that spot and go take him? And there's that possibility that opportunity could exist. So I think doing the due diligence, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, especially in a unique player like that, makes all the sense in the world. And I think if anything, that's probably what you want to read into it. Considering Goot going to McMillan's workout and bringing in Shamar Stewart for a pre-draft, what are the chances we move up or just doing due diligence? I think it's more the latter. It's easily that they could fall in love with one of those guys. And again, if one of them's available at 20, maybe then or 18, it's a little bit more palatable to kind of make that trade. But, there's going to be other guys that they bring in too. I'm sure there are other first round picks that they're not tipping their hand on that they probably love, that they don't even want teams to know that they're interested in. So they can be coy with this stuff sometimes as well. I think they're doing their due diligence. I think they're getting as much information as possible, and I think they'll make the move that they feel is best for them come draft day. Whether that's McMillan or Stewart remains to be seen, but I could see both of those players being very high on their draft boards. On a personal level, are there any players in particular that you're pulling for and hope they succeed? Not that I know them or anything like that. So I would say no. I want all of these Packers to succeed. I say this every time. Part of my job is I have to be critical of players. I actually dislike that piece of it. I would really love to be able to come on every day and just be like, man, Green Bay has 90 Hall of Fame players on their roster. This is unbelievable. And then be like, I guess the 90th guy is this person who is also a Hall of Famer, but he just happens to be the 90th best Hall of Famer of the 90 players on the team. And all the coaches are making all the best decisions and Goody is never making a mistake. That'd be really, really fun, but it doesn't necessarily work that way. So, but regardless of whether or not I feel like a player was the right move for Goody to make, or whether or not, I liked a player coming out of the draft, or whether they've sucked the last 3 years, I want all of them to go out and have massive 2025 seasons. So I'm cheering on all these guys. I want Green Bay to win. I want them to be successful, and I want to see another freaking Super Bowl trophy in Green Bay. So no personal players that I'm pulling for, but I definitely want all these guys to succeed. Also, I loved your video about fun ideas to upgrade our weapons. Favorite one was going back to back wide receivers in first and second round. Goot loves to double up. Excited to see where he does it this year. Yeah, probably not super likely at wide receiver, but and probably not the best route to go either, if we're being honest. But yeah, those are, again, more for kind of entertainment purposes only, just putting some, ideas out in the ether and being like, would this work? Would this work? I kind of sometimes want to be like, all right, imagine Goody comes to you, right? It's like, all right, I want you to think outside the box. What are some things that Green Bay could do to upgrade the weapons? And if I was like presenting to Goody, I'd be like, listen, I don't know that I like any of these ideas, but there's no free agents left. There's no rumors of players that are out there via trade that you can trade for at wide receiver. We know what's available in the draft. All right, we need to be creative about this. Let's throw some crap out there and see if anyone likes these ideas. That was more than like a, hey, here's some great ideas, more than like a, hey, here's some ideas. I actually don't like a decent amount of these, but let's throw some out there and see if anything could make sense. And for those of you who are really hoping Green Bay still upgrades the weapon room, this is sort of the situation Green Bay finds itself in. So there may not be a lot of great ideas, but at least there are some ideas, whether you may like them or not. But I appreciate that you like the episode, Will. Thank you for that. Why wouldn't we sign Zach Tom for an extension at this time? Because there's two sides to a negotiation. And it's not as easy as just being like, hey, we want you long term, sign this piece of paper. Zach and his agents are going to say, hey, yeah, he's worth this now. Imagine what he's going to be worth in 2026. And Green Bay is going to say, well, this isn't 2026. This is 2025. This is what he's worth now. And Zach Tom's agent's going to say he's the best right tackle in football. Green Bay is going to come back and say, well, he's really good, but he's not the top. He's like he's a top 5 to 10 right tackle in football. We want to give him top 10 right tackle in football money right now. And they're going to say, we want top 1 right tackle money in 2026. And there's a negotiation that has to go back and forth. And Green Bay is going to say, we want you for X amount of years. And Zach Tom's agent's going to come back and say, we want him for this amount of years. Green Bay is going to say, here's what guarantees we're going to give. And Zach Tom's agent is going to say, actually, we want all of these guarantees. Plus we want this, this, and this. Green Bay is going to say, we want to have workout bonuses so that there's an emphasis that Zach has to come in and do the offseason program and hit his workout incentives and things like that. And it just goes back and forth. So yeah, I'm sure Zach to some extent would love that financial security. I'm sure the Packers would love to have that deal done. And the fact that they could get Zach Tom signed to a long-term contract, just know that those are not easy conversations or negotiations. And that's why those things usually take a while. But to your point, Bill, the sooner that they can get that deal done for Zach, probably the better. Probably a little bit too late already with some of those deals that got done, but it's not going to go down anytime soon. It's only going to go up. Would you ever consider a remedial video on all the different wide receiver routes and packages, the D plays, just a tutorial of intricacies of football? I've thought about doing something like this, Judy. I think, and it's funny because my parents, I think, have a couple times been like, listen, we like watching your show from time to time, but it's like way over our heads. Can you do like a football for dummies version of this? And I do try my best to kind of make this as just kind of digestible for everyone, whether you're the nerdiest Packer fan in the world, whether you have a PhD in football, or whether this is your, whether you've watched 10 games in your life or anything in between. But I get sometimes it gets a little bit nerdy, it gets a little bit extreme and things like that. I don't think I have any more time to do anything sort of different. I'd actually thought about like doing maybe some even like courses in Green Bay of just like intro to football or things like that, just to, get people maybe that would like that sort of thing, or maybe doing like a pay for class online where we would do like a webinar and people could come join live and we could do like a Q&A of intro to football stuff. So maybe at some point in time. Right now I am freaking swamped. So I love the idea. I've definitely thought about things like that in the past. I don't think it's anything that's on my radar in the near future, but it's not maybe impossible long term. And thank you for the super chat, Judy. Appreciate that a ton. Good afternoon, Andy. What does the Packers brain trust, or when does the Packers brain trust admit there's nothing there with LVN and move? Not this year, not now. That's for sure. I think them bringing in a new defensive line coach is admitting that things were not going as according to plan on the defensive line as a whole. I thought LVN did take some steps forward this past year, but you certainly do not give up on a talented defensive lineman at this stage of his career. And what I'll add, and I very much believe this wholeheartedly, Luke Musgrave has nowhere near lived up to his expectation as a first-round pick. That is not up for debate. There are times, Josh Jones, Josh Jackson, trying to think of Demarius Randall, Quentin Rollins. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but some big time first and second round busts where when they're on the field, you're like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. What are we possibly doing here? I wholeheartedly do not believe LVN is at that level. Now, I think LVN is a number 4, maybe number 3 rotational defensive end. I think he's better than Enigbare, quite frankly. I think Brenton Cox and him are probably actually pretty close at the moment, excuse me. I don't think they have Rashawn Gary, and that's why, again, you kind of want one more guy to kind of be that number 2 or even a number 1, and Gary can be the 2. So I think they're one guy kind of short there. But LVN is a solid 20, 25 snap a game rotational defensive end. Now, that's not what you spent a first-round pick on, but I also don't think LVN's out there and you're just like, oh my God, what a waste of space. What are we possibly doing? Like, he can play that role. I don't have any issue when he's out there of being like, this is such a unbelievable, terrible player and he's just going to give up big plays or he can't do anything. Now, he's still playing good football. It's just at the level of more of like a 3rd or 4th rotational edge. Freaking Jonathan Garvin was like a 3-year rotational edge, and LVN is far more talented and just better than what Jonathan Garvin was. So giving up on him, no. thinking that you just need to cut him or release him or get rid of him is also a mistake because he plays still a role. It's not the role that you wanted with a number 12 overall pick in the draft, but it's still a number 3-4 edge rusher role. And you need as many of those guys as you can rotate in as possible. And I do think with a new defensive line coach, there's still some hope that you can get something out of him. And here's the other thing. For defensive ends, a lot of times it's just figuring out one move, one way to get to the quarterback, one thing that now all of a sudden you can win with, and everything opens up for you. And we've seen this happen with pass rushers in the past where they kind of stumble through a first couple seasons and then all of a sudden they develop one pass rush move and boom, things take off from there. We talked about Trey Hendrickson this past year. Go look at the Trey Hendrickson timeline. Hendrickson did nothing his first couple of years in the NFL. And it took him a long time to get to where he's at today. It took a 7-8 year journey for him to become one of the best defensive players in all of football. If he would have been a first round pick and you looked at him at his first 2 years, you'd have looked at him almost identical to LVN. So there's really no upside in moving on or taking your medicine. And like, there's times for that. Like there's definitely times where they should have done that sooner. But like, listen, they've been willing to get rid of Amari Rodgers, in year 2? Like they've released picks before when they felt like they've needed to. They've moved on. Maybe again, sometimes not as soon, but I don't think we're at that point with LVN. And unless he just goes out and has an atrocious year in 2025, he's probably going to be here at least for the length of that 4-year contract. And hopefully this is the breakout season for him. What's the earliest you could see the Packers taking a guard or tackle? To me, there are a ton of guys who meet their thresholds in that 4th to 6th range, and it feels right to me. A guard, probably 3rd round. I don't think, maybe 2nd, but I would say probably 3rd round or later for an interior offensive lineman in this draft. And I think the earliest they could go tackle would be 1st round. I wouldn't stun me. Not what I'm expecting, but again, we just talked about take the best player available and figure out the rest later. If they really truly felt like an offensive tackle was the best player available, I think it could be in the 1st round. But I think guard maybe 2nd, but probably 3rd is the earliest. And to your point, Ian, I think it's more likely that they attack offensive line on maybe late day 2, but probably early to mid day 3 of the draft. Matthew, thank you for being a member for 11 months. Good afternoon, Andy. Was LVN a mistake? Yes. This is a great counter to your other question. He was a mistake. As of now, things can change. He could go out and absolutely tear it up this year. But when there's like a Christian Gonzalez out there and somebody that I know a lot of people wanted, I think you can certainly make that argument that just would have been the better way to go. And he has certainly not lived anywhere near up to the expectation of that top 15 pick in the draft. Not even close to it. So, whether he needed to trade down and find something different or whatever, you can very clearly say that up until this point, 2 years in, going into his 3rd year, it has been a mistake up until this point. Could he turn that around still? Sure. Do I necessarily expect it? No. Do I think he's ever going to be probably a top 15 pick worthy player? Probably not. But I'm not willing to give up on him. I do think there's still a lot of talent there. But as of now, you would certainly look at it as a mistake. Yes. Stay authentic, Andy. I will always do so. You have my word. A.A. Langer, thank you for that super chat. I really appreciate that a ton. Very kind of you. Jobin, what do you think Goody sees as a bigger need for the draft, wide receiver, defensive tackle? I'm going to say defensive tackle. Because I'm going to say that he looks at next year. He's got Devontae Wyatt that he has to choose a 5th-year option on. Kenny Clark, who you're probably moving on from after this year unless there's a massive improvement from where he was a year ago. Carl Brooks is a nice rotational piece at best, and Colby Wooden already has to earn his job in camp this year would be my guess there. So, you're looking forward and you don't really have enough in that room. You need more there now, and you definitely need more there in 2026 and beyond. So I think defensive tackle, you can make the argument for wide receiver as well because you need somebody now. Plus, you also have Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs becoming free agents. You're not basing anything off of Hardman or even Melton or Malik Heath at this point. So you can kind of look at 2026 and say the only players that you have are Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks at this moment as well. So I think both are needs, but I'll go defensive tackle ever so slightly. 9 route's a go route. That's your easiest one, Judy. Your easiest one. 9 is a go. So if you hear that they're running a 9 route, it is just running in a straight line forward. So that is the easiest one to remember. Judy, the best way, there's great websites that show you all the NFL routes and the naming combinations and things like that. There's some really great websites out there for that. Also, there is some great YouTube videos out there as well. If you just kind of look at like wide receiver routes, there'll be ones that show you or give you the name of the route and what it's called, and then how it's run, and then they'll show you like an NFL example of it as well. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there that does it, quite frankly, probably better than I would to begin with anyway. So definitely go check those out. But yeah, wide receiver routes too. The other thing is that like there's so many of them now, like you can kind of get the basics down, but there's so many different route combinations of like just even trying to get all the name things down and how different teams call them different things. And I'll even get in my own head sometimes of like, all right, which one is this one again? And I like, all of there's so much out there, so much vernacular that I try not to even get, like, I don't honestly rather just explain it and be like, because if I say like, oh yeah, you ran a zig or you ran a Texas route or you ran whatever, an angle route, people may not know that. So I might even just say in general, like, all right, the running back, ran that little route to the outside, then he cut it back to the middle. Like I could call it a Texas route. I could call it an angle route, but sometimes just explaining it is the easier way to go, again, because these things have different naming conventions for different teams as well. So I would say of all the things that maybe you want to learn from a football 101 standpoint, knowing all the names of the billion different routes out there, I don't even know how much of a value add that is. But if you want to do it, there's definitely great stuff that's out there for you. Do you think there's a world where we see the Packers picking the first round twice? I think it's unlikely. Is it in the multiverse somewhere? Maybe. But I don't think it's super likely that they move up from what's their second round pick, like 50 something. So what, 23 plus 32 after that is probably 55. I think getting from 55 to 32 is going to be some pretty heavy lifting. So I would say it's very, very, very unlikely. Or 3 times in the second round, Seattle has 50 and 52. I don't see that happening either. I think those are, again, fun sort of situations to look at. If you could get 50 and 52 for 23, it's an interesting proposition. And whether or not you want to do that, I think there's some risk in that as well. I don't hate it, but I think if anything, if they trade down, I think you're probably looking at trading down from 23 to like 31 to 32 and picking up like a third rounder. So you've got a first, a second, and 2/3, or using your third rounder to try to go get up from 23 to like 18 to 19, something like that. I think those are the kind of moves that you're probably looking at. Am I the only one who's more concerned about corner than edge? Coaching was bad in the edge, and there's potential with a draft pick or two. Cornerback is worrisome to me. I understand it, Connor. I think Jeff Hafley earned my trust last year of being able to design a defensive backfield in the modern NFL that works with guys like Keyshawn Nixon and Nate Hobbs and Javon Bullard and Carrington Valentine. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I would like to see either, whether it's Jair being back or maybe one, kind of premier corner, first or second rounder in the draft. I would kind of low-key love that, if I'm being honest. But Jeff Hafley has my trust, and I believe that he can put together a defense with the pieces that they have. And I'm always more of one where give me better pass rush, and that's going to make the cornerback's job easier. So if I can get to the quarterback quicker, I can live with Nate Hobbs and Keyshawn Nixon and whatever other corners that you want out there. If I don't get a pass rush, I could have 2 of the best corners in the world. I could have Deion Sanders and Darrelle Revis in their prime. If I can't get to the quarterback and the quarterback's got 8 seconds to throw, it may not matter that I've got the ultimate corners because they have all day in the pocket to throw. So I'm more of always leaning towards edge, but I definitely get your hesitation. And I don't have a major argument with you for that. I still think corner is something that they can still look at come draft time. Do you like Shamar Stewart more than you did Rashawn Gary and LVN? No expert here, but I think he is way more disruptive in college and a freakier athlete. If I were to rank them coming out of college, I would definitely put in Stewart first. I probably would have had LVN over Gary on my initial assessment of it. I think if I were to go back and rewatch college film now, not even knowing what they've done in the NFL, just being more evolved now, and every time you do this, you gain more understanding and more appreciation. You track what went well, what went wrong. I think if I were to look at both of their college tapes now, I would probably put it Stewart, Gary, LVN. If you had to ask me of when I evaluated each of them in their individual drafts, I would probably put it Stewart, LVN, Gary. But yes, I would have Stewart ahead of both of them. Thank you for the super chat on that as well. You are more than welcome, Judy. I think you do a great job talking about all kinds of topics in a way most any football fan can understand and then be able to have an opinion on. And the nerdy stuff either lets you dive deeper as a football fan or just sounds or just say sounds nerdy. You say that stat means he's a good player and I'll take your word. Keep up the awesome work and enjoy your vacation. Well, I appreciate that a ton. I've had somebody that I have a lot of respect for say something similar to that, of just being able to break it down and make it digestible for people. And it's one of the great compliments that I've been given. And it means a lot to me because I do think we get very nerdy and into the weeds, especially when Justice is on and him and I get into some weird stuff. And listen, we'll break down undrafted free agents and we'll go through the weeds, right? We've got 365 days a year to do this. And not only that, but we've got bonus Q&As on top of that and some bonus content and all of it. So there's probably over 400 different pieces of content at least in a 360, probably closer to 500, probably getting 500 different things on pack a day just from me in about a 365 day a year period. So we've got the opportunity to nerd out on some stuff and we're definitely going to do so, but I still want it to be fun, entertaining, enjoyable, and digestible for people. So I appreciate that a lot, Will, and I'm glad that you enjoy it. Does Pack a Day do a Packers big board for the draft? I did one last year for a Packer Report, and I just literally did my top 100. So I didn't necessarily do like a big board Packer centric. I just did mine. If I feel comfortable with it, meaning like I've really gotten to study the prospects the way that I want, I'll do another top 100 this year. But it's probably just going to be a top 100 of my guys, of like how I rank them in this draft. And it's probably going to be very simple. But I may or may not get to it. If I do, I'll put it out there. If I don't get to it, I don't. But no specific Packers big board. But definitely check out the Green Bay Draft Guide. Ross Uglum, Jacob Morley, Jacob Westendorf. Those guys do just a phenomenal job of putting together which guys are very Packers-y types and where Green Bay could draft them and things like that. It is a must. I'm not just saying that. It is a must purchase for me every year, and I cannot recommend it enough. And then definitely check out the Cheesehead TV Draft Guide as well, which is a very Packer-centric draft guide. Both of those well worth your time. Totally agree on needing better pressure. Got to wonder how Green Bay will use Wyatt this year. So much disruptive potential. I just hope we see the best version of him. I think he's a very talented player. He probably is closer to just being what he is at this point, a good but not great pass rushing defensive tackle who, might miss a little bit of time here and there and is not a great run defender, but I still think there's so much talent there. And hopefully this is the year he can kind of piece it together. All right, friends, I think that does it. We hit just about an hour here. We got to everyone's questions, so I appreciate that a ton. I'll be back next week with live stuff. I've got great episodes coming for you. All of you who are members, all of it's out there for you. We'll be uploading a Sam Munson video shortly here is the kind of last one I need to put out for this week. And then I'm going to put up a bunch of Ross Uglum daily draft pieces as well. So there should be, I think, 4 or 5 more pieces of content coming for you today. And then, I'll be out, but all that stuff will be out there. And I hope you enjoy the heck out of it. I will see you guys very, very soon. Enjoy your week. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.